These are our life's aha moments from the perspective and experiences of two Christian women who are focused on creating a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ.
Join us as we share and discuss insights we have learned and provide tools to empower you on your journey of intentional creation.
Welcome to another episode of Ahas, Awakenings, and Applications. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Leann.
Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We are going to continue with our discussion on connection and focus a little bit more today on spiritual connection. After our last recording, I was looking through Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, and I was just kind of flipping through the pages, and I got to the end and realized that there's this whole section on creating meaningful connection at the end. And I was like, wait, what? So I started reading, and I've been reading for the last 2 weeks about this. And there's so much information. And I was just like really so intrigued because I think it's something that we just don't think about very often at all, and don't kind of put into practice much at all. So she talks about the difference between near enemies and far enemies. And when I first read that, I was like, oh, does that mean like enemies in your own circle, or far enemies, or enemies that are, not, don't live close to you or something like that? But that's not it at all. It's just talking about concept and nuances of differences of words. And since we've talked about that a lot in the past, about the differences between words and those small nuances that make such a difference, I really wanted to kind of dive deep into this and share this information because I just thought it was so fascinating. And I think it would help others to know how to help with to create more meaningful connection. So I wanted to read a little bit about what Brene Brown defines as spiritual connection, and we can talk about that just a little bit. She says she defines spirituality as the deeply held belief that we are inextricably connected to each other by something greater than ourselves, which we are. We are connected because we are God's children. And we are brothers and sisters. And so we do have that connection. And she was talking about how, even people that are atheists and people that are super spiritual, we all have this connection. It doesn't really matter about our religious beliefs. We are just connected because we are.
Yeah. I read this and I think it's something that you have to read kind of slowly and reread again because there is so much information there. And thinking about that spiritual connections, and something that I hadn't really thought a lot about before was how those spiritual connections begin with ourselves and that self-acceptance. And we've talked about that recently in the past. And so I love how this just fits right in with the things that we've talked about in the past. And when I think about how we are all connected, I once remember reading something about how we all breathe the same air. Like I breathe in air that other people have breathed out, and they're breathing in the air that I have breathed out. And that, happens all around the world. And so I think that's really interesting to think about how we are connected in that way through breath and through all of the things that we collectively share and just share with one another. And so we know, and I think science is proving more and more how much we need each other and that interconnection to thrive in our society. And as we see less and less connection, that becomes more and more apparent how much we need that in our lives to be happy and to have those really strong connections with one another. We need to be able to interact and be able to share ourselves with one another.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think the adversary is working very hard to disconnect us from each other, even in our families, disconnecting from the people that we love the most. And it's just and keeping us from getting us away from what really means the most, what matters the
Mm,
most. And that is that
mhm.
connection with
Yes.
one another.
Hmm. I was just going to say this morning, when I was out running errands, I had my radio on and they were actually talking about, this was on NPR, um, National Public Radio, and they were doing an interview with a pastor, and talking about how their church had closed. And I didn't hear the whole interview, but I believe they were talking about how there's less people attending and they were unable to keep their church open. They were talking about how that's going to affect the community, not just people who are religious, but our
Mm,
whole community, where you think about all of the service that is given, that coming together of people and connecting, um, even opening their church up for different activities and things that all affect the community. It was this gathering place that people no longer have to go to. And so
wow.
I think that's a really great example of, it's just like what you said, whether we are religious or not, we still have this connection and we need to think about, how are we going to keep connecting with others, um, if we don't have these things in our lives?
That's so interesting. It's so sad.
It is, because they were talking about this one church this building has been there for over 100 years.
Wow.
And I think this particular church had been closed for about 3 years. And the pastor, I believe she was the pastor that used to be in that building, said she's only gone past that building twice in the last 3 years because it's so painful to
Mm,
recognize how she doesn't have connections with many of those people that she used to have because this church is no longer um, functioning there.
wow. That's so interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, we just kind of forget how much um, activities and things that we're doing connect us with one another.
Hmm.
And if we're, if people are moving more towards, we talked about this last week, more towards social media and that type of connection, it's just going to get worse because it's not connection at all, as we've said.
It isn't. And really just fostering that, I think
Hmm.
being able to foster those connections with other people, I'm constantly thinking about that. I don't know that I act upon it as much as I think about it, but I do feel this really strong need to make very intentional connections with other people. And I do believe, Brene Brown talks about how those spiritual connections really begin with ourselves and how we accept ourselves. And I feel like as I've worked through that, work on myself, that I have been able to create connections with people that maybe I wouldn't have done in the past. I think we've talked about that a lot this last year. But
Hmm.
yeah, we have to be so intentional, I think, in creating those connections with people, especially as we see them maybe fall away from our lives in other areas, such as that
Hmm.
church that that woman was talking about.
Yeah. So, Brene Brown talks about, like I said, near enemies and far enemies. And I want to just kind of briefly talk about what the differences is or are. So, just some examples. This was from an article by Chris Germer called "The Near and Far Enemies of Fierce Compassion." So he says, near enemies are states that appear similar to the desired quality, but actually undermine it. Far enemies are the opposite of what we are trying to achieve. So, for example, a near enemy of loving kindness is sentimentality, similar but different. A far enemy of loving kindness is ill will. The opposite of loving kindness, similar, or the opposite of loving kindness. So it says, similarly, a near enemy of compassion is pity, and a far enemy is cruelty. So just, it's just those little nuances that can change something. It can change. So she says, the type of nuances that predict the differences between wholeheartedness and brokenheartedness. I was
Mm,
like,
ooh.
wow.
Wow, yeah.
Because I was just thinking that because as I was reading more, it's these near enemies that just change things just enough that it's like it's false. So we've talked about this many times. I don't know if we've done this on an episode, but we've talked about how Satan's lies, how he just kind of changes the truth just enough that it's no longer truth. But it's
Mm,
close enough that we don't see it, or we may not act on it, or we may act on it and not realize until later that we're actually on the wrong path.
hmm.
And so it's like these little things that are leading us down the wrong path, not where we want to be.
They can be so subtle. It's to me almost like what I used to think between empathy and sympathy. I thought they were the
Hmm.
same word for a long
Yeah,
time. And
yeah,
once I learned that, they were definitely not the same thing. And the outcome
exactly.
of you of having those is will take you in two totally different places.
Yes, it's that reminds me of that talk. I think it was President Hinckley where he talked about the trains,
I think so. Yes,
where
right?
you could be on a track and then just one shift
Yes.
of the tracks can send you on a whole different track.
Yeah.
You can end up in a totally different
Totally
place.
different place where you want to
Yeah.
be. Yeah. I like how she calls near enemies become the practices that fuel separation.
Hmm.
So I think that is, you know, I think that's what we're seeing now is
Yeah.
a lot of things being fueled to that separation.
Hmm. So she explains, or she quotes Jack Cornfield, and he says that near enemies may seem like the qualities that we believe are important and may even be mistaken for them, but they are different and often undermine our practices. The near enemies depict how spirituality can be misunderstood or misused to separate us from life. I was like, whoa.
Not just from one another, but
Yeah,
from
from
life.
life. Because I think, if you think about that, if you feel alone, abandoned, when you get into that state of anxiety, you don't want to reach out or connect with anything or anyone. And you're just
Hmm.
alone, and then you still feel more alone. And that's just separating you from life.
Yes. Yeah. Which we see so much of right now.
Hmm.
I think that's what we see with social media, where people turn to that thinking that's where they're going to find it. And then they just keep going back to it. And
Hmm.
it's really very hollow. It's shallow.
Right. Well, I think I read an article was talking about that when you're scrolling, you get dopamine hits.
You do. Yeah.
And so you can scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and get all these dopamine hits, but it's not real.
Yeah.
It's not lasting. So you can live on that for a little while, but it's still not going to connect you with people. It's still not going to make your life change. It's still not going to help you become and do and continue to learn and become like Christ.
Right. Right. Yeah. I love all these fascinating connections that she makes when she talks about these cultivating meaningful connection. I think this
Mhm.
is going to be an exciting direction to go and share with everyone. And I look forward to learning more about how that's going to look, how that looks in my
Yeah.
own life.
I wanted to read this example. Well, she says, on the surface, the near enemies of emotions or experiences might look and even feel like connection, but ultimately they drive us to be disconnected from ourselves and from each other. Without awareness, near enemies become the practices that fuel separation rather than practices that reinforce the I can say that word, inextricable connection of people. And then she says, this is huge. I'm like, yes, it is. This
It is
is
huge.
huge.
I
And
really
just,
like the part where she talked about armor. Well, she talks about being seen without armor, and that armor is the shame and the
yes.
perfectionism and taking that
Hmm.
armor off. I don't know what the quote was, but I just thought it was a great way of looking at it.
Oh, yeah. I think that was something I read last week where she was talking about how that, we talked about when we did the shame episode.
Yes.
that there's those different shields that we have up, and
Yes.
perfectionism is one of those shields.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there's so many ways, but those also fuel separation, right? When we have that armor on, we're not, it's that protecting ourselves. And when we have so much
Mhm.
protection, we're not really connecting with people, having that connection.
Exactly. It's so much, we try to protect our heart because we don't want to be hurt. We don't want to be judged. We don't, we don't want those things. And so we're trying to protect ourselves from being hurt.
We are. And I think that this is where I think we see so much happening with the judgment, right? This is
Hmm.
with so much judgment, there becomes this fear and this need to put up armor. And if we can just let that go, which is not an easy thing to do, it
Mm-mm.
is not easy to just let go. And sometimes maybe we don't need to just let go. Maybe we need to do more. But I think I can see, this is the fruits of judgment. Judgment
Hmm.
definitely disconnects and it creates armor, creates that need to feel like we have to have armor to survive.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think in this world where everything is, well, especially with social media and how that fuels that, we see the perfectness, so we see it what everyone else is doing, and it looks so perfect, and now they have this perfect trip, and they have this perfect family picture and all those things, but it's not reality. I
Right.
mean, for most people. So
It's not 24/7 for sure. It's a
yeah,
snippet of
exactly.
time. That was
Hmm.
great. And I think most of us have those snippets of time where we have good things happening in our lives.
Hmm.
It doesn't show you the other side of it. What it took to create that perfect picture. You might have
Right.
spent half an hour trying to get everyone to look the right way. I don't know. And then get that one little picture.
Right.
Oh, goodness.
Or they don't talk about the things that went wrong in that trip, and because I don't know, there's not very many trips I've been on that there wasn't something that didn't go the way you planned.
Right. It's true. Oh, goodness.
But I think that going back to that, how important it is for us to be have that connection to ourselves, to have that self compassion, like we've talked about before, and not allowing ourselves to be, when someone judges us, it's like that's their opinion. That's not my opinion of myself. And
Hmm.
of course, we can always look and see, is there something I need to look at when someone says something? But then we can self-reflect. It's not anything about that person, that person's opinion of me. It's about me.
Right. And, I like to tell myself that person must really be hurting. And
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
helps me to go, okay, I need to show them compassion. I can say that when I have felt attacked, the best thing that I have done is to not fight back with words or actions that
Mhm.
will fuel any of that. That learning to let go and to really focus on, what do I need and what does this person really need, and just really having that love for yourself and for them
Mhm.
during that
Yep.
time, because you will not have regrets with that in the
Right,
future,
exactly.
right? And you can feel so good about that. It's really an act of love towards yourself as well, showing yourself that you don't want to give that power away to other people, and that you want to have that peace in your life. And
Right.
so that was a little off track, but I think it's important.
Yeah. But I think it's, bringing that, going to Christ and praying and asking, okay, this happened today. Is there something I can work on with you? Am I okay with you? It's that relationship with Christ, and where am I? What am I working on with him, not with someone else?
Hmm.
It's not, it's just everyone else's opinion is their own opinion.
Right. I love
And
to
it,
ask that question with my little grandson. We play this game where we'll say, well, is this fact or is this opinion? And then I'll give him a phrase so that he can
interesting.
start to learn what is fact and what is. So if I say, apples are the best fruit ever, he will tell me is that fact or opinion so that he can start to learn and recognize that. And I think we
Mm.
even need to ask ourselves that too. Is this
Yeah.
fact or is this opinion? It helps you to stay centered.
Yeah. It's all back going back into truth. What's truth?
Yes. So that's a very helpful
So
tool.
yeah, I love that. Um, I love this example that Jack Kornfield used. He said, the near enemy of love is attachment. Attachment masquerades as love. It says, I will love this person because I need something from them, or I'll love you if you'll love me back, or I love you, but only if you will be the way I want you to be. This isn't the fullness of love. Instead, there is attachment and there is a clinging and fear. So true love allows, honors, and appreciates. Attachment grasps, demands, needs, and aims to possess. I was like, whoa, that's
We could do a
huge.
whole episode on
Oh, and
just
just that.
that paragraph.
Exactly. But just kind of, I just think that's a really good paragraph to kind of show the difference,
Hmm.
because we think we're loving, but we're really not. And I think a lot of these nuances are based in fear.
Hmm. Yes, and doesn't she talk about control too? Doesn't that come up
Hmm.
in
Yes.
here?
Fear and controlling, trying to
Fear and
control others.
controlling.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Which I
Which we
think,
try to do so much.
yeah. So I think which comes back to that safety. Do we feel safe inside?
Yes,
Do we feel safe in our own skin? Do we feel safe with other people? I think a lot of that comes back to safety.
it does. And we've talked about how that's just such an important skill to be able
Hmm.
to develop. Um, And I think we see that too, when we step out into social media, there's so much there to create that fear. And so it's interesting to see how all these pieces are connecting together.
Hmm.
They come together. So when I learn about one, then I move on to the next, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not done with the other one. Right, all these different topics. So I do love
Right.
that.
But I think it's interesting to see how they do all connect and how we can use this information to be more aware and understand so that you know, that we're not living in lies.
Yeah, so I think what comes to my mind is being totally honest with myself. Where am I using these
Hmm.
these tools in a wrong
Exactly.
way in
These
my
near
life?
enemies.
Yeah, these near enemies. Where am I using them in my life? And um, using that self-compassion as I recognize that, and then
Mhm.
be ready to move forward and notice what's happening, be aware, and really
Mhm.
working to change that. Just testing out one little concept at a time
Right.
and
Right.
practicing that in the relationships that I do have and trying to make that
Exactly.
better
Yeah. I
because I
love
want
that.
great relationships,
I
right?
know, me too. I was like, that connection is my word of the year, and I really want to understand how to make those meaningful and not just, I don't know. I'm not a surface person.
Hmm.
I'm a deep person, and
Hmm.
I don't do well with surface connection. And I want
Yeah,
to I want to create that deep connection
I feel that
with
same
more
way.
with more people.
Right. And I think that's something to be aware of when we do that. We may be overlooking someone who could offer that eventually, maybe not in the
Hmm.
beginning, but maybe over time.
Exactly. So what's an invitation that we could leave with our listeners? Maybe just being aware of those little lies
Hmm.
in your own life, in your connections with other people. Where are the things that aren't working?
Hmm. And maybe preparing your heart and mind to be ready to make
Mhm.
changes as you learn more about it.
I love that. Well, this has been wonderful, Leanne. Thank you for discussing this with me today.
Thank you, Melissa, for all of your input. Join us for our next episode. as we discuss Brene Brown's concept of grounded confidence and its associated skill sets, and review the importance of learning how to name emotions and reconnect with physical sensation.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow or share with others so we are easier to find. Check out our show notes for each episode in your podcast app or YouTube, and join us on Instagram for more daily content at Awakenings Podcast.